So this is a session called it's actually People's History of, and it started out as People's History of Energy because I was at an Extreme Extraction Summit and we did a history kind of remembering and people contributed. Then I was at the fracking conference that just happened in Tennessee and we kind of did a People's History again. And Grace asked me if I would come here to share this with you all. So it's basically participatory exercise in remembering history. So, so what I'd like to do is first just have everybody introduce themselves, say where you're from, maybe say a little bit about why you're here at this conference. And then I have some historical, a little history to share kind of from my own experience, and then we're going to share experiences with each other. And then we're going to imagine the future. Okay? And this is kind of an ongoing thing. I have lots of materials that I'm kind of collecting, trying to create something that people can then share back out to help people remember and learn more about what people have done to help, really to help inspire people now. And I say that probably because I work at Highlander, so I'm inspired all the time by the stories of what people did in the 30s, 40s, and 50s under very difficult circumstances. So I feel like with the times that we're facing, it's important to share historical experiences of success. So that's the point of this. So is that right? We're good? So let's just do a go-round and have everybody say who you are, where you're from, and why you came to this conference.
Larry Hillis, I'm a civil rights lawyer from Bellingham, Washington. We came out here for the first two conferences to representing folks in West Virginia who were being slap sued for trying to lock Massey did lockdowns to equipment and stuff. We mostly represent demonstrators around the country, given the times we're in. These days, a lot of it is environmental, a lot of it is coal, both out here and out our way. They're trying to put a major coal transshipment terminal in north of Bellingham, and there's been spectacular opposition, everything from sit-ins to comments on scoping. We had 125,000 people comment on the scoping for the EIS for the terminal. So, and we love being in Appalachia.
My name's Karen Boyle. I'm Larry's wife and legal assistant, and went to high school and first couple of years of college in Huntington, West Virginia. So I've been trying to get him for several years to get a case in West Virginia or somewhere in the neighborhood so that we could visit my mom more often. Kill two birds with one stone, I guess. And definitely where my heart is Appalachia.
My name is Dave Hoke. I live in Asheville, North Carolina. I'm very interested in, I guess I'll cover the bases and just say extreme extraction. That seems to be the hip and applicable term. And I've been coming to this conference all 4 years, and I'm involved in various ways in opposing these horrors, and pretty much it.
I'm Terry Lodge. I'm an eco-terrorist from Toledo. and on the side, when I'm not spreading terror, I practice law, which sometimes effectuates that.
Where'd you say you were from?
Toledo.
Yeah.
I'm originally from southern Indiana and have close affinity and attachment to Appalachia, the hill country. But I've been doing a lot of environmental stuff for years. I'm in solo practice. This is a great, expensive hobby. I'm having a great time, far better time than most of the corporate attorneys that beat me about the face and neck. Anyway, I have been doing anti-nuclear work, weapons as well as power for many, many years, since the 70s. And have been more recently involved in anti-fracking work in Ohio. Ohio is rapidly becoming the Pennsylvania of the Midwest, or the New Jersey of the Midwest, if you look at fracking, radioactive fracking waste disposal, which is a gigundous problem. And extreme energy is really the, I won't say the last frontier, but certainly we're in the battle for the future of the world, and it's certainly underway. And I'm not particularly optimistic, but I have been teaching myself that that sort of hope. This sort of reminds me of Satchmo Page's observation that you should look over your shoulder and measure how closely you are being followed.
I'm Tom Butler. I'm from Huntington, Vermont. My day job is with the Foundation for Deep Ecology, and my primary volunteer association is as a board member of the Northeast Wilderness Trust. I'm a conservation activist foremost, but also a writer and editor, and I've put together a number of books, including Plundering Appalachia, about Lone Coal Mine, and our newest project, one of the newest projects through the Foundation Publishing Program, a book called Energy, Overdevelopment, and the Delusion of Endless Growth, large format photo book. And I'll be showing some images from that book tomorrow. And I'm particularly interested in this history of organizing in Appalachia. In Plundering Appalachia, we used an adaptation of a section from Chad Montry's book, To Save the Land People. I don't know if you know his work, but just a brilliant historian. And I was fascinated by that movement organizing history, the early resistance to strip mining in Appalachia. So I'm very interested in this presentation today.
My name is Stan Olmstead. I'm from Jonesboro, Tennessee. I'm recently moved to the state. I'm actually from northeastern Utah, where I retired with the Department of Interior, doing natural resource work associated with oil and gas and other facilities in that area. I'm trying to fill a niche here, either through volunteering or troubleshooting or contracting. So if anybody's interested, I'd be happy to talk to them. The Bureau of Land Management had a mission of sustaining the health, diversity, and productivity of public lands for future and present generations. And they weren't fulfilling that goal, much like the BP oil spill and the Minerals Management Service, now defunct. They were compromising the public land for economic reasons. And so after retirement, I sent a kind of a memo. I'd be happy to share that memo with people to show where I was coming from. Anyway, now I'm getting into some environmental writing. I presented some short history on environmental law to federal employees, but this conference is my first outing since I moved to Tennessee, so I'm anxious to be here.
What a fascinating and illustrious group here from so many spots. I'm humbly from Tennessee, so I'm a history professor at Middle Tennessee State University, which is outside of Nashville. And for those new to Tennessee, it's actually a larger undergraduate institution than the University of Tennessee here in Knoxville. And I am here with students because I teach interdisciplinary courses on civic engagement and activism. And although I am here theoretically just with one class that I teach that's an environmental history class, their projects for the semester have to be historic to meet the historic requirements for history survey with our department in the state of Tennessee, but a form of research that they can do is oral history. So if they hit you up while we're here to take an oral history from you, that will be coming from this particular class. But they're here they're reading the Sierra Club's coal country, and the activism issue that they're learning about is mountaintop removal. And whereas the East Tennessee kids here in Knoxville, mountaintop removal and all that is just right in their faces. It's under their nose. They're aware of it early on. The kids from Middle Tennessee don't know about it as much because the mountains are not quite current. And I'm here actually with freshmen, so their eyes are wide open and they're completely dumbfounded by all of these intriguing people who have committed their lives to issues beyond themselves, which is the purpose and point of why I brought them.
Thank you so much for
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. You didn't say your name.
Oh, sorry, my name is Mary Evans, and I write on Tennessee Women Progressives in the present.
So we're just sharing who we are, where we're from, and why we came to this conference.
My name's Coleman Smith, and I live in Asheville, North Carolina. And I'm somewhat cross-trained in social, economic, and environmental justice work, and been on the ground as a community organizer in the South for about 35 years. And the current project is an initiative that I share with a colleague, Claire Handerhan, called the New South Network of War Resistors. And we are not so much membership as trying to build relationships across issues, campaigns, and movements. And we spend a lot of time just meeting with folks and studying things. We have like some principal studies. We'll be presenting this afternoon at 3 o'clock in room 241 on atomic Appalachia, militarism's environmental impact in the Southeast. And so we do anti-militarism work across the South, arguably the most militarized region in the country. And I've just been interested in the, where environment, well, in this case, where our laws and, cross into the work that I'm doing as an activist on the ground. And I'm interested in where the next generation is getting its information, thank you. And why, and where they are stymied or see the future as being futile. And like, why even get involved? Engage them in, 30, 35 years worth of experience. Why we need your new, fresh ideas. I'm not ready to go to pasture yet. I've got 40 years of experience I want to share with you. So I've learned and I'm learning constantly to tone it down as an older white Southern man.
I'm Lou Zeller, and I'm the Executive Director of Blue Ridge Environmental Defense League for the last 2 years. I came to the environmental justice movement because my home in North Carolina in Madison County was just a few miles from a proposed high-level nuclear waste dump. This was in 1985. And I learned about the Blue Ridge Environmental Defense League, which had become kind of a grassroots project. Actually, it was started by an Episcopal Church Women's Committee in Glendale Springs, North Carolina, which sits astride of the Blue Ridge in the northwest corner of North Carolina, close to Virginia and Tennessee. So they hired me in 1986 because of the work I was doing in community organizing in Madison County. We organized a local educational committee and began working with the league over those years. Over the years, we, as a community organizer, you do everything from set up the chairs to publish the press release to do the research. And so over the years, we picked up a lot of skills, whether it was radio actualities, media work, video work. This was back in the 80s. When those things were relatively new. So over about 10 years ago, I found out that, actually I was informed by a friend of mine who's an attorney. I'm not an attorney. He said, Lou, I've seen your work on the website. And he was a self-taught lawyer, and he gave me this box of books, literally a box this big, which he had no use for, and I think he's moving, so that was part of it anyway. But we went to the University of North Carolina, Greensboro, and, in terms of rules and regulations and deductive reasoning, he said, you've got that. He said, but you need to learn about, analogy. And I said, so what is the story? What does all this mean here? F sub 2.86. And he said, oh, it's simple. And he showed me this, and it wasn't simple, but it unlocked a key, a door to what legal work was all about. And so soon after that, we had done legal work before. I had attorneys working for us on a high-level nuclear waste dump. That's why the league came into being back in the 80s, because of the Department of Energy and that search for that high-level dump. But about 8 years ago, we started challenging nuclear power plant licenses, intervening, and doing it pro se. And so far, we have chalked up a series of victories. For example, Bellefonte was considered a done deal in 2008. TVA's Bellefonte. Everybody said you can't fight TVA, they don't follow the rules, they don't have any rules, and besides it's atomic power. And we said, well, let's go find out. It's like Gary said downstairs, go straight at him. And so we did. And so here we are 5-6 years later, and Bellefonte is once again relegated to the dustbin of atomic history, I believe. A couple of years ago, we challenged the waste confidence rule with our friend Diane Curran, who is an actual attorney under National Water Policy Act, works out in Washington, D.C. And so we were one of 3 plaintiffs in that case, and what that has done last year was a ruling from Federal Circuit Court, which has jammed up all nuclear power plant licensing in the entire country for a period of 2 years, and maybe longer if we play our cards right. That's what I mean.
All right.
Plus shutdown.
Yeah, well,
So, we started doing this timeline at this Extreme Extraction Summit that I was at in February, and it was I grew up in Oak Ridge. I worked on nuclear, actually that's when I met Lou, worked on nuclear power, nuclear waste. I worked with Save Our Cumberland Mountains on coal. We worked some on oil and gas. So it was, the Extreme Extraction Summit was the first time I was in a room with people working across the gamut of energy. And this was mostly organizers, people from community groups, and that's really my background. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a community organizer, but I've worked with a lot of lawyers through the years. So I think environmental law is really a key part of what happens in terms of lawyers working with community groups. So we started this timeline just to try to remember, and it's been interesting for me to remember my own history and thinking about what I know about it and what I don't know. And so I think it's important to try to remember history about, this is really geared around energy mostly, and mostly the examples I have are around Appalachia. Because I thought I'd start with some examples that I know something about, and that you all will share them, and then you all are going to share examples, and we're going to put them up on this timeline. And I'm kind of trying to gather this stuff up so that I can put it in a way that people can then share it back out and add their own histories. At Highlander we do this often with our own history, trying to share our history, so I think it's important to share histories, remember histories, and try to share that with people for the future. I go back into the Highlander archives a lot, and I read a lot of stories from people, and it's really inspiring to me to think about. So if you were black in Mississippi in 1930, how desperate did you feel? But you did stuff anyway. So I have some examples, and I'm going to pass them out, and you all are going to read them and share anything else you know about these, and then we're going to have you all do a round of your own, okay? So I'm just going to pass them out. All right? Okay.
You insist.
Absolutely. Oh, good. Think someone else to do it. You all seem like you would probably comply. And we'll do kind of a time order. Yeah, that's right. Just looking at the ones I'm handing out. And this is really, from my experience as a community organizer, this is not the legal, not a legal history, but you're certainly welcome. Certainly legal things. Okay. So we're just going to have people share. Actually, this is a good one too. We're going to share these kind of in time order. So, does anybody have one from the 1800s? All right.
So we're just supposed to turn this over or just...
No, you're going to share it, then we're going to put it up.
In the late 1800s, companies came in Appalachia buying up land. It was like the first cut. It was just basically clear cut. I don't know if y'all can see this. This is just barren, scarred, snowy, nothing. And although you're focused in on Appalachia, this was very typical wherever they went. You can see the Rockies and British Columbia, all over, everywhere, Europe. And you remember that, in Europe and particularly in the United Kingdom, they just actually scoured everything. So the forests were clear cut, and coal and oil and gas reserves were explored. Profits from that industry enriched corporate owners, but did little to support Appalachian communities, and it's still prevalent today. And now you're referring primarily, when you get back to, let's see, forests were cut, oil, coal, gas reserves were explored. Now they may not have been looking for uranium in the late 1800s.
They were not.
But we'll get back to that, right?
Right.
And
Now, this is really around corporate companies coming in and actually buying up the land and minerals, which then has long range.
And that pattern is still dominant. And we're taught in this country that we should kowtow to that policy, to that culture. That's part of our narrative, right?
Right. Yeah.
That's who we are.
Right.
So we all agree that this is America.
It's also a form of colonialism.
Absolutely.
People's land for their reasons.
I want to take all these back for my class when this is over.
I can actually send them to you. So,
The other
any other?
thing I just want to
Okay.
say about that is that especially, I know when this happens in West Virginia, I think it's true in Tennessee, it's true in Montana. When you bought the land to farm or do whatever you want to do with it, you only own the land on top of it. You don't own the mineral rights to what's underneath it. And
Right.
so that the land could be sold out, the mineral rights could be sold out from underneath you. And people that just really got hurt. And that's happening in Montana with the pipeline that they want to bring down for the tar sand.
That split estate issue is real important with property ownership. And my experience with BLM was many surface owners were not aware that they not only did they not have the mineral rights, but the mineral rights really trumped their, I mean, they had to get supposedly fair market value, but the point was they had to sell out.
So if you, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, and so I was just reading an article in Tennessee about people actually doing leases with oil and gas companies around fracking with the same thing happening, people not knowing what they're signing away. So it is it's something that keeps going through time and then has endless impacts on people.
But a quick comment that follows up on what Karen was saying. I mean, how do y'all feel about, when we think about the Keystone Pipeline, we're all familiar with that. How do you feel about like a foreign corporation using eminent domain on U.S. soil to like take what they want? And if you stand in the way, they have a foreign security force to deal with you.
Well, that
So we're going to keep on with the history, we're not going to get sidetracked right at this
Oh,
moment,
do
okay?
you want me to wait?
Yeah, I want us to sort of make our way
Keep
through
that in
history.
mind, man.
We're trying to make our way some through history, so I'm just going to try to keep us on this if you don't
But
mind.
that's what they did with the Indians when they wanted to.
No, exactly.
you know,
I mean,
so-
the land's been taken, the land's been taken, the land's been taken. So, early 1900s, there's any more 1800s? I don't think I did anymore. Early 1900s?
Yeah, 1913. United Mine Workers of America forms. Coal mines opened to feed industry and energy needs. Local residents went to work in the mines, underground mines. Many people moved to company towns in Appalachia from elsewhere for these jobs. The work was strenuous, hazardous. Miners and families lived in company towns controlled by the mine owners, with their pay coming company script that they had to spend at the company store. In 1913, the United Mine Workers Unions formed to organize miners for decent wages and working conditions. And here's just a wonderful photograph that's
It's a Earl
found
Dodder.
somewhere.
I believe it's a Earl Dodder photo. That's great.
Of some of the miners in that situation, and they are plainly not, well, they don't look unhappy. And I can tell it's not because they're getting paid that well, it's because they are part of the mine workers union.
Yes.
One thing, this is funny, I just considered this, that a song came that we have used that I learned years and years ago, came out of some of the United Mine Workers. And it was a tune, that was not a tune, it was a song but set to music by Pete Seeger. And it's step by step. Because people know this.
Mhm.
Step by step,
Right.
The longest march can be won, can be won. Many stones can form an arch, singly none, singly none. And by union what we will can be accomplished still. Drops of water turn a hill, singly none, singly none.
All right, so that makes me want to add this music and culture in the Appalachian Mountains, which has the
We
Real
don't
Wood String
do this out
Band,
west, so I
Orange
don't know what
Leaves.
this is about.
You add that to the 1800s.
Have we watched that?
No, add that to the 1800s. That's been around
No, that's
forever.
30s though.
Okay.
If
That
you want
song.
to follow, has anyone ever seen the movie Out of the Out of Darkness? If you've never seen Out of the Darkness, it is the personal interviews. It's a documentary on the formation of the United Mine Workers Union, and it is like serious good stuff.
Okay, let's see, I'm not sure what the next thing is, 1920s? I believe there's a, do we have a 1920s one?
Extraction?
Blair Mountain?
That would have been 1921.
Yeah, oh, here it is. Okay, Blair Mountain.
Blair Mountain.
Yeah, here's the Blair Mountain.
who's familiar with the Battle of Blair Mountain?
Oh, I know a little bit about
Well,
it.
then everyone, well, then someone who hasn't spoken should cover that.
No, if you know it well, tell us.
Oh, no, yeah, you should tell it.
1921, there was like no organizing, or very little organizing going on in the coal fields, particularly southwestern West Virginia.
And Logan, Mingo.
Logan, Mingo, Boone, and organizers had been arrested, and I believe they were put in Logan County.
Jail.
And I don't advocate, this form of violence, but you gotta remember, this is right after World War I, and so 50,000 armed miners assembled, and they arrived and formed up in Marmot, which is, down there, and it was about a 50-mile walk. They were gonna go and free their comrades. And when they got to Blair Mountain, the coal operators and the owners had hired a private army to meet them. It even involved, this was the Second Civil War. There was about a 7, 8, 9 day long, roaring battle with high-powered rifles, machine gun emplacements, people, it was the first time the U.S. Air Force ever dropped bombs on its own people. And many of the miners wouldn't fire on each other because they were wearing uniforms, on each other, and it was kind of the miners kind of lost that battle, I guess, if you arrange it, but it so shook the establishment and so shook, everything in D.C. that over the next 10 to 11 years, that's when all the coal fields got organized. And so the Battle of Blair Mountain is like written out of your Western Virginia history. You don't learn that. And so 3 years ago, there was a reenactment. Mountain Justice people got
It's a march on
Blair
just
Mountain,
saying
and we
Blair
assembled and we marched the 50 miles, like trying to camp, basically.
But 2 questions. One, don't they want to do mountaintop mining in Blair Mountain?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's why there was a march.
Isn't that where the term redneck came from?
Yes.
Well, the redneck came from like the solidarity was
They wore
red
bandanas.
bandanas that everyone was making, and they put that around their necks, and it bled onto their necks, and that's exactly right.
Okay.
Term of honor.
All right, 1920s, 1930s, 1940s?
Wait a minute, let us think.
Right now, we're just sharing these ones, so then you'll get a chance to
No,
add, okay?
shut up.
Well, you know what, I gave you the wrong thing.
Well, I didn't.
Oh, no, that's right, that's fine, okay.
Oh, I
No, I did, okay. 1960.
So do you not have one for the 1940s?
Well, I just was thinking, I had, I was redoing them last night. I have a TBA, which is the 30s, the development of TBA. But, do you have one for the 40s?
Well, there was a notable technological development in the 1940s that allowed basically for the current landscape of coal extraction presently. And that was the kinds of machinery that was developed, particularly very large, high-powered bulldozers, developed for wartime use, were then able to be deployed in
Interesting term.
southern Appalachia, redeployed
Yeah.
for military use, and commenced the era of strip mining.
And often wheels
Actually, I
by
did
the
have a
quarter
mechanization one, but I was trying to figure out what years.
I
So
got-
it started in the 40s, the
Yeah, it was
mechanization.
post-World War II.
Uh-huh. Do you want to go ahead and read the
40s, early
mechanization one?
50s.
What were they used for during the war?
Road building, and, military base construction and the like.
I've got mechanization from the 70s on. I don't know if there's one before that.
No, I think I was, because I know in the 70s it was when a lot of strip mining really boomed in Appalachia, but I don't know when the the mechanization's been happening for a long time, so.
But they used those kinds of machines in western mines, I believe, early on, didn't they?
Prior to that, maybe so.
Because they probably
Well,
did.
after the 40s, I mean.
Oh, yeah,
obviously,
oh, sure.
But
Yeah.
Utah, Colorado.
Because they had a,
Yeah,
yeah.
But prior to the 1940s, the Appalachian coal industry was essentially underground mining.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's interesting, the union itself worked to destroy itself. Because they saw, do you know when the drag lines?
Well, actually,
I
the
don't know
early
when the
miners
really
in the
big ones came
70s,
in.
some of the UMWA people were working with Stockton to ban strip mining because they saw that it was going to decrease employment.
Right, and so outsiders are often blamed when you go up there, rumor, and area says, oh, you're here to destroy our jobs, when in fact, like, you know, the automation that they saw, you know, it destroyed like a couple of hundred thousands of jobs.
Okay, 50s, 60s? Is that the mechanization we'll put that? So
Yeah.
we should actually make the years probably sooner.
I was going to say, in terms of, I know absolutely nothing about the history of bulldozers and when they got big, but
You don't?
I don't. But the pictures that I have seen of the building of the Panama Canal,
Well, they had giant machinery.
those
then.
things were just
Yeah.
unbelievable, and they're almost hard to even comprehend that they even existed at the time that they did.
Right?
They've been using them most recently to like destroy Palestinian villages.
Okay, let's see. 70s?
Seabrook and the, oh,
Oh,
have you got one on Seabrook?
no, but I'm going to give you a piece of paper so you can add it after we finish this round.
Okay.
You've got,
70s? I believe they're 70s, yeah.
Sockham, 1972, Save Our Cumberland Mountains, which I did not know that, forms in Tennessee in 1971-72. Residents of the Tennessee coalfields won an appeal to require large absentee land corporations to pay taxes on their minerals. Out of this effort, Save Our Cumberland Mountains, or Sockham, was born. Over decades, members organizing together had major victories, defeating many strip mining permits, including a 20,000-acre proposal from Amex Coal Company, working for stronger regulation of strip mining, protection of surface owners, protected communities from other environmental threats, and over the years, working for fair taxes, and through the years, Sockham started working more and more across the state of Tennessee. In 2008, the organization changed its name to the Statewide Organizing for Community Empowerment, still Sockham, and continues working with chapters across the state on issues of economics, environment, racism, and other social justice issues, and it's SOCM.org.
What was the original issue, Karen? It says on there before they technically formed.
Getting absentee land corporations to pay taxes on their minerals.
They weren't paying property taxes on the mineral holdings, so they did a suit to require them to do that.
There is a gap in here.
Yeah, we're not.
No, I'll take one of those pieces of
Okay.
paper.
Oh, is there one that's earlier? Yeah.
I mean, you haven't done like large hydro.
We're just going to finish sharing these and then you're all going to add. So actually, you know what I should do is go ahead and give you all some, so as you're thinking about stuff.
Wasn't Sockham tied in, was the Vanderbilt University Med project?
Yes.
Yeah.
Vanderbilt students actually did some land ownership
Yeah, that's where they
research.
found that-
And they found they didn't pay taxes.
Well, they found that hillside acreage was being taxed for $1 an acre.
Yeah.
And they also found out that Al Gore Senior was in a big syndicated partnership.
Baker, was it Baker?
No, it was Al Gore Senior.
Because Baker was also in a partnership around coal.
I didn't know about this property tax, but the 1872 mining law almost does the same thing with the purchase of the property.
yes.
I mean, it's
Okay,
just,
you should make one of, do one of, I'm handing out these little pieces of paper, so as people
Oh.
think of things, just,
So you want
because we're
that
gonna
one?
add them, yes.
okay.
Okay, so we're gonna finish the round I did, and then we're gonna add your own. So, that was 73, late 70s, 80s,
So 1973 is when Sockham was,
that's when it started.
71, 72.
This is 82. Starting after World War II, there's been an ongoing movement against nuclear weapons and later nuclear energy. On June 12, 1982, hundreds of thousands of American protesters stormed Central Park in New York City to peacefully rally. Forgive my aside, it is mildly oxymoronic that they stormed the park to peacefully rally, but that's just my
That was the language out of Wikipedia, I was thinking they stormed.
Oh, I
I'm not
wasn't
sure they really
faulting you,
stormed.
I was just amused.
I just was kind of, did they storm?
And it was a full million.
Right, and the picture you can't see, but it looks like it looks like Dr. King's speech at 63, but this isn't Central Park. To peacefully rally against nuclear weapons and the nuclear arms race between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. The protest called for complete disarmament of U.S. weapons and an end to the arms race that perpetuated the long-standing Cold War. Let me please take 10 more seconds to add a worthwhile FYI. If anyone's unaware of it and interested, Eric Schlosser, the investigative journalist who first came to fame with Fast Food Nation, has just released a new book, Command and Control, a very weighty, highly touted, wonderfully reviewed book about the dangers of our nuclear arsenal in the United States, and it gives many examples of very near catastrophic misses. Sounds like a great book from what I saw. I don't have any stock in the company, but
And there's lots of, I mean, you will have some more examples around nuclear stuff, so there's definitely a lot of other pieces.
I was there in
You were there?
1982, and the
All
storm, it was a
Oh,
silent
okay.
storm.
Uh-huh.
Because walking down New York city streets are usually a cacophony, but it was silent
Wow.
walking down those streets, to
Wow.
Central Washington.
So you were there.
Deafening silence.
All right. I think 1980s?
Yes. Broad form deed victory in Kentucky. Kentuckians for the Commonwealth in 1988, working with many people across the state. We were successful in getting a constitutional amendment in Kentucky to outlaw broad form deeds. We all know what those are about.
To outlaw
Yeah.
what?
This was an amazing
Outlaw.
people's, yes, this was an amazing people's victory. I'd just like to add parenthetically, in the entire fracking controversy, I think the illustration by what happened in Kentucky was that in decades prior, people were reserving mineral rights when they would transfer land, and the expectation until the 60s or the late 50s was that the worst that could happen is maybe some vertical oil drilling or underground coal development, not anything like what started emerging by way of strip mining and ultimately MTR. In fracking, this is one of those things where people make a few bucks for this generation by selling off the mineral rights and have no idea that technologically, in 2002 or 2003, someone perfects the technology for horizontal shale drilling and revolutionizes in some of the worst conceivable ways oil and gas extraction. So strip mining, nobody contemplated back when they were giving it up, and I remember some of the examples in Kentucky where people who were living in houses where the driveway would be left alone and the house and the outbuildings would be left alone, and they were strip mining the entire vicinity right around the house up to, within a very short distance. Another thing that I've seen in Ohio is that in the 20s and 30s, when the Corps of Engineers or BLM later, were ceding CEDING land to the state park system, the feds would retain mineral rights and only transfer the surface rights to the state parks. And we recently uncovered in the state park a very quiet EA Fonzie by BLM to allow fracking. And they did consult with the retrograde state park system under our fascist dictatorship in Ohio, but it's pretty amazing what the whole concept of reservation of mineral rights really means when everybody thinks that they're going to cash in and make billions of dollars off of fracking.
So I just want to say one thing about the KBC thing, which I found remarkable, was they had to do a statewide vote
Right.
to outlaw the broad form deed. So they actually got the people in the state of Kentucky to vote to outlaw the broad form deed, which was an incredible organizing political victory because of how they had to do it.
Two things. So fracking's come up a number of times, just in a few moments. And my experience with fracking is the two main issues. One, the geology and the aquifer relationships, so every well would be different. But the main thing is the chemical used and the proprietary association with that chemical. And I would think, especially in state or federal land, that they should deny that proprietary information, that if they can't give up the chemical, then, because they have confidentiality, whether it's good or bad, they do have it, that they shouldn't be using a chemical that would deem dangerous to the aquifer.
It's a broad umbrella on that. They won't release the proprietary chemicals that they use to keep golf courses green.
Well, again,
No, I mean, it's a
that's the
huge
bigger
universe.
picture.
I know.
And I think
That's a
that
big-
the
that is true.
2005 Energy Act did a whole bunch of stuff to negate the Clean Water Act. And now states are trying
Only
to
if the
catch
building's
up to negate the federal law.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
So let's just finish the last couple examples. 1980, 1990.
I got the 90s here, 1991. People of Color Environmental Justice Summit in 1991. Over 300 African, Latino, Native, and Asian Americans from all 50 states, joined by international representatives, gathered for the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit. It was organized to bring together people of color who, along with low-income white people, are more likely to be targeted for the placement of hazardous waste production and disposal services. The term environmental justice was coined to recognize this inequity around environmental devastation. People of color gathered not in reaction to the environmental movement, but rather to reaffirm their traditional connection to and respect for the natural world, and to speak for themselves on some of the most critical issues of our time. For people of color, the environment is woven into an overall framework and understanding of social, racial, and economic justice. The principles of environmental justice were established at this 1991 groundbreaking event to guide and connect all the communities gathering to move forward together more strongly.
And in 1984, a few years after, 94, the President Clinton signed the Environmental Justice Executive Order 12898, which requires all federal agencies to take environmental justice into consideration.
Yep. And I think there's one more.
Oh, I have the,
Oh, no, we have two more. Okay.
mine's
Actually,
today,
he's
this
next.
year.
2007,
Yeah.
Alliance for Appalachia formed. Communities organizing to confront mountaintop removal across Appalachia joined together in the Alliance for Appalachia. This alliance has joined groups across the region to collectively organize for various laws and policies that would limit mountaintop removal. The alliance has also provided training, developed relationships, and organized actions that include collective actions in Washington, D.C. Current work is looking at economic transition in Appalachia and the common need to protect the waters of the region.
All right.
I assume several people in the room are probably involved in the Alliance for Appalachia. Anyone?
Well, yes, it's a broad coalition.
Is
and
there-
I haven't really seen one of our sponsors for this event is, United Mountain Defense,
Right.
we got Mountain Justice, we got like
Appalachian Voices.
Appalachian
yeah.
Voices,
And-
Earth First, I mean, they're all.
And there's several groups, I think, doing workshops during this that are part of the alliance, I believe.
And, well, then, since we're on it, then we might just say, it's an interesting alliance, as all are. It's hard to keep them intact. And because it is broadly representatives of both the grassroots and the nationals, and there has been a long-standing tension there regarding policy, particularly mountaintop removal. Lots of distrust, rancor at times.
Yeah.
Some of which was very interesting to watch when I was preparing a grants docket to give monies to those groups. It was interesting. And
Talk to you later.
well, I'm not in that, in a position to do that kind of funding right now anymore, but it was very interesting to learn that some of that distrust and that rancor came out of the earlier history that happened in the 1950s and 60s when the initial opposition to strip mining came from the grassroots. The nationals were nowhere.
Right.
Yeah, it
They were-
definitely goes back.
Yeah,
it's
it
back,
goes way
yeah.
back, exactly.
Old issues around the
Yeah.
surface mining control regulation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why it's amazing that the alliance has held, I think.
Yeah, which is great. It's wonderful.
So we got one more?
2013, Multicultural Alliance for a Safe Environment, or MAZE. It's mazecoalition.org is what it is. It's very Native American in origin.
It's multicultural, actually,
Yeah.
with Native Americans.
The development of the atomic bomb during World War II created a strong anti-nuclear movement pushing for disarmament over decades, and this work continues today. The mining of uranium and testing of bombs in the western United States affected communities, including indigenous people, and there has been a long-term effect to address toxic situation created by these events. Efforts continue today with Multicultural Alliance for a Safe Environment in New Mexico, working with communities affected by mining, production, and disposal of uranium and spent fuels, and then testing of nuclear weapons. I find it interesting that from Madame Curie to the atomic bomb, to the nuclear facilities that have failed, to the contamination, and Yucca Mountain, our government is still promoting that product without any effective understanding of what it's doing. With the Navajo people took it in the shorts when they mined it. There's toxic landfills. Moab, Utah has a Superfund site right next to the Colorado River. And Energy Solutions is probably making more money in removing that. They're transporting it by truck 70 miles away. And they're probably making more money than all the money that was made from that mining. Lake Powell has not a Superfund site, but a toxic landfill at the bottom of it. And I assume it got capped by sediments from the lake. I mean, and so anyway, it's a nasty product that we need to address now.
Yes, okay, so now we're going to, oh, go ahead.
What was the name of that organization?
Oh, the
Multicultural
Multicultural Alliance for a Safe Environment. MaizeCoalition.org.
Thank you.
So now we wanted to have people add, so we'll just start, go around one at a time. And, why don't you share one?
Why don't you let someone else?
Okay.
I got
We'll
a
start
whole
here.
slurry
Mary,
here.
do you have one you'd like to share?
No, I'm here to learn.
We're supposed to, well, I just mentioned earlier the 1872 mining law. And that had to do with purchase of load claims. And that law has not changed since the Grant administration. And just one example, there's a mountain near Crested Butte, Colorado, that I think they want to mine molybdenum from it. And the Crested Butte, being a tourist town such as it is, and a ski town, and a dirt bike town, and a pot town, and a beer town, and a pizza town. Anyway, the mountain was purchased by the company, and it probably was a foreign company. I don't know that, but it probably was. And the only thing that the state, the county, or the city could do was deny them water. And so they have not mined the mountain yet, and I think it's because they need water to do it. So there was an out, but the point was the 72 law allowed them to buy the mountain for, I think the real estate down there is like $300,000 or $400,000 an acre, and they bought it, I think, for like $7.50 an acre on top of the mountain. It was real small amount.
Keep going around.
Well, we're a little thin in 1960s
Okay,
and
great.
70s, so I would add in 1960, and I've got it here, Harry Caudle introduced a bill in the Kentucky State Legislature to ban strip mining. That failed, but it was the first sort of abolitionist legislative assault on the practice of surface mining in Appalachia. In 1971, Congressman Ken Heckler introduced legislation in the U.S. House of Representatives to abolish strip mining nationally. I'll read the first paragraph of Ken Heckler's essay, Abolition is the Only Solution. In 1971, while serving the people of West Virginia in Congress, I introduced a bill to phase out and ultimately abolish the strip mining of coal. Within 6 months, our legislation and a Senate companion bill endorsed by Gaylord Nelson and George McGovern had attracted 90 co-sponsors. The New York Times editorialized in favor of our approach, and there was growing national opposition to this destructive practice. In 1971, you had very influential Democratic senators and 90 co-sponsors in the House of Representatives to abolish strip mining.
And a strong people's movement to abolish
And a
strip mining.
strong people's movement.
And so
and
instead
they
they
were
passed the Surface
simply-
Mining Control Reclamation Act.
Exactly, they were undercut by the national groups. Ultimately, a regulatory reform approach passed. You got the Surface Mining Control Reclamation Act passing in '77. Carter administration went along with and the grassroots felt totally undercut and screwed by the national conservation groups.
Undercut's a pretty euphemistic term here.
Is there a distinction between strip mining and mountaintop mining?
Yeah.
Yeah.
'Cause I don't know what the difference is.
Well, it's,
Well, mountaintop removal is a form of strip
It's kind of a matter of,
mountaintop removal is strip mining on steroids.
Right.
mountaintop removal allows you to actually.
So it's just a more grandiose method.
More,
Aggressive.
it's a lot more, I mean, we could discuss this outside here, but
Yeah.
basically it's more explosive used each week in mountaintop removal than in both of the Gulf
And-
Wars. All that kind of happens, and they're using mountaintop removal today to depopulate areas. and particularly the laws that are lagging behind is because the corporations' inclusion with certain state, governments are, like kind of working it and ignoring the travesties. And I mean, one of the nation's worst human rights violations is happening right up there. That's just 2 hours from our capital. So that's mountaintop removal. Strip mining is just moving it and pushing it, and but you're right. It's technically the
Strip
same
mining is
thing.
very destructive. Mountaintop removal is way more destructive.
Okay.
It's a,
I would like the full lesson on the 1977. Could you tell more about that?
Sure, a little bit, and I would recommend the book by Chad Montry, To Save the Land and People. He's a historian who now
I'm sorry, more
teaches.
slowly.
Chad Montry teaches at one of the universities in Massachusetts.
To save
Now, I can't remember which one. To Save the Land and People. And you can read an essay that briefly goes through all this history in the book Plundering Appalachia. I noticed there's a copy on the table downstairs, and if you give me your business card, I'll send one to you. So you have it. But I strongly recommend the original. So I won't do justice, but in the kind of the Cliff Notes version, there was a very strong indigenous homegrown movement in the 50s, beginning of the 50s and 60s and early 70s against strip mining in Appalachia. There was not a national environmental group presence. That grassroots opposition was totally homegrown, and it started to get traction to the extent that people like Harry Caudle and then Congressman Ken Heckler were actually trying to legislate the abolition of surface mining. Thus, then in every social change movement that we could name, you always have this fundamental tension between the reformers and the radicals. And in that case, a reform movement or a push to regulate and control the surface mining gained traction. Ultimately, there was essentially a backroom deal, and the coalition of groups and activists in Appalachia who were really pushing strongly for abolition of the practice felt sold out by the national environmental groups.
And which ones were
So,
they?
can I just defer this to discussion during the break, because I just want to finish the round, because it's
Sure.
11:10.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that looks like there's so much knowledge in this room, if we just had several, 5 hours, it'd be great, but I just want to make it back around, and then we can sort of,
This is not exactly directly related to the populist level of extreme energy, but the 1996 International Court decision regarding essentially ordering all nations of the world to immediately commence to dismantle and disarm their nuclear weapons has never been implemented in this country. And it has sweeping implications for want of having ever been implemented, because it would cause the phase out and shutdown of, as Gary Davis was explaining this morning, the incredibly widespread, geographically widespread nuclear weapons industry, which sure as hell has implications for places like SRS and Y-12 and Oak Ridge in general. The theme that recurs in all of these stories that are being told is that of energy colonialism. And Appalachia, the whole colonialistic approach. Appalachia has long, almost forever, been written off as a sacrifice area because nobody lives there. And, well, I mean, you understand my point. And that, it's very interesting to hear the story of the schism between the homegrown anti-strip mining movement and the big greens, because that sort of disconnect persists today in many, many respects. Maybe some things are improving at some levels. I'm not entirely certain of that.
all right.
Can I add?
Moving, no, we're moving on around, because it's now 11.
Am I allowed to do a very recent one?
Yes, sir.
I think in this chronology of anti-extreme extraction, we should mention the, I guess you'd call it, sub-movement that coalesced around opposition to the XL pipeline. I don't know exactly when to date it. I guess it became most well-known in September 2011 when Bill McKibben's organized mass civil disobedience bust in front of the White House, which from an up-close and personal view, having been busted there, I don't know if it was support the effort, but it was fun, we partied. And
You have this video?
and that's a pretty biggie.
Yeah.
And now there's, in the theme you're talking about, and you're much more gentle, I admire that. A lot of folk who think the movement, the grassroots movement is being betrayed by the big greens, have a lot of criticism of Bill McKibben claiming his militancy has been more than mollified by big green influence, to wit subsidies, if you will. I just throw that out there, no judgment.
We have a nickname
Please,
for
judge, we're asking you to.
So moving on around?
Well, I think there's probably something to it.
I mean, you know, my experience of every issue I've ever worked on is that there's lots of layers and complications and potential for conflict and history and different kinds of power that play out often over and over in the same ways. So I sometimes think it's a miracle that we actually managed to get anything done, but I think that that's some of the structural things that I think happen over and over in this country.
How long do we have?
We have to 11:15. Okay.
I just want to say
Tons of time.
one thing, one of the things that people are familiar, I assume people are familiar with the term banana republic. We're starting to call Appalachia the cold republic. And I put it exactly that way when I say that to people, they get it immediately.
Okay, moving on around. Do you have one to add?
Yeah, I didn't think I did, but I do. Unfortunately, it's the bracket to the 1913. The attacks on and destruction of the UMW in the last 20 years, and as mechanization has increased, the attacks have increased, and the influence of the Union has decreased drastically.
Do you want to write down on that? All right, Lou.
It didn't begin as energy extraction, but in 1978, Love Canal homeowners organized Love Canal, and over Hooker Chemical, waste dump, Lois Gibbs method of grassroots organizing led to families being relocated and the passage of the surplus Superfund law, which has an impact on energy extraction. And also, and maybe more important, or at least as important, is that the method of grassroots organizing inspired many groups. My own, Janet's work, learned a lot from Lois, and we're still learning from Lois in terms of grassroots organizing, the door-to-door housewife science. She's been in the term housewife science. If you get too deep into the technical pool, you lose people.
Yeah, housewife science.
Housewife science is really true.
Well, in housewife science,
if
the
you get the
impact to
experts
your
in there
backyard or
and
your
nobody
living room
understands
is
you,
important.
and you lose because you've left the people behind that are directly affected.
Question for the lawyers in the room. Wouldn't the Storm King Mountain fight in the Hudson River Valley be also an environmental
Yes.
law landmark because it was a pump
Yes.
storage facility?
When
Also
was it?
grassroots opposition against it.
When was it? Does anybody-
Late 60s?
Yeah.
60s, 60.
I mean, and isn't that the beginning of the National Environmental Policy Act?
Yep,
That, the Storm King fight?
yep.
So,
So write that down on that piece of paper right away.
Good, good, so-
Part of it.
Okay, here we go. One more.
We have a pet name for like all the big greens inside the Beltway. We call them gangrene.
Wonderful.
The
What
ex-
are they? Tell me who they are.
all-
Sierra Club.
Sierra
all of them,
Club
all of
first.
them, all of them,
Yeah.
every one of
Yeah.
them.
Sierra
Every one.
Club, Earth First?
No.
No.
NRDC, National Resource Defense Fund.
Sierra, Greenpeace is bouncing back, but I mean, you get compromised and you get co-opted by the
Environmental
money.
Defense Fund.
I said that, and we can talk about this actually, you know, at 3 o'clock at our presentation in room 241, but like, the extraction of lands for secret projects is not always seen as energy, but the lethal advance of the atomic age began in the 40s. And I mean, you know, they took Oak Ridge was moved within 2 to 6 weeks. People were told to leave. Savannah River site where they reprocessed and like processed tritium, 310 square miles. Los Alamos, White Sands. Uranium mining. Someone mentioned today there was zero evidence or lack of cancer in the Navajo or Diné populations. Until they went to the mines, and now the largest unmined uranium deposit in the country is in South Central Virginia. So if you do that, yes, I'll tell you more about. Then the TVA, you know, hydro project, sort of the same thing. You build a big dam, you got to move people around. Lake Powell, I mean, there was kind of out in not well-populated areas, but there was condemned land force movement, Hoover Dam, Fontana, they buried and moved people's cemeteries. 1980s, personally involved in the National Forest Protection Act. There were groups, Heartwood, Dogwood, Earth First. We were fighting pulp and paper because in the South there were about 200. Chip mills, which were like, within an X number of years, short number of years, would take a 50 to 75 mile radius and completely, strip its trees and move it on around. So that's what we fought, and we have brought them pretty much to a standstill, but they're still clear cutting. But and a lot of that fight was against, clear cuts on public land. And then like the second mining of uranium. I mean, the whole thing about the atomics was like they needed uranium. And now we're forced and present, not yet, but 2013 forward, we have about 80,000 tons of spent fuels, the highly, highly radioactive, spent fuels, the same stuff that's bubbling in 3 reactors in Fukushima. So I term this the second mining of uranium, is the reprocessing of spent fuel for weapons-grade plutonium. And its argument can be made that nuclear power generating plants don't produce that much electricity because of the huge carbon footprint, the amount of energy goes in there, and that they always wanted the weapons-grade plutonium. So the second mining, the second extraction of uranium is coming up if we allow it to happen.
All right.
Or you didn't get this one up there, executive order.
This is executive, yeah. Okay, any last ones I should stick up? So I appreciate you all. I wish we'd had more time for the workshop.
Thank you.
There's an evaluation form here that they would like you all to fill out, and I guess leave it at the desk. Susan, and I just was going to say that I'm trying to put this into something that people can then use and share.
I was just going to say,
So,
how about a website?
yeah, right now I just, I have so much information, but trying how to actually organize it. Sure.
All I need is your
So,
email address and a phone number, and I can...
So actually, you know what, if people want to leave their contact information, I'm happy to share whatever I end up with at the point I have something shareable.
That would be great.
So, I was gonna say, if people are interested in this, whenever it gets shareable, I'm happy to get your email. Yeah. And I appreciate
Do you
all the,
mind putting your contact information?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a marker right there.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I can use those. Let me see.
Yeah, those
Right,
are,
right.
you don't want to.
Be interesting and useful. And that's it.
Yeah. This works.
We all know.
Yes, I do. You want to say,
So the other thing is I'm looking for good photographs. We don't have any good photographs.
Photographs, you bet.
Because photographs are a little hard to come by. A lot of these came from actually the Highlander Archives or online, but. So it's swilliams@highlandercenter.org.
Something that we just don't seem to have enough time to do, since this was like an environmental law conference. How do we move the attorneys, how do we move the new attorneys and the existing ones to actually, fight and do this stuff?
They are fighting.
Not nearly enough of them are really fighting, and when I come up against really, really well-informed, good fighting on, good people sitting here.